Hello everyone, this is Pippin Williamson with pippinsplugins.com and welcome to episode 3 of Plugin Thoughts. In this episode I want to talk to you about the idea of not forgetting about core functions in WordPress. WordPress has a lot of really great functionality that is built into its core functions that I feel a lot of times are either overlooked, forgotten about, or simply overwritten. This episode is really going to apply to theme developers just as much as plugin developers or more. And the reason for this episode is actually something that I was dealing with this morning while working with a theme. I'm not going to try and point fingers at anybody or say that they've done something wrong or not, but I want to bring you into a real world situation where I've actually run into this situation and I want to kind of bring up ideas about how you avoid this, both as a developer who is dealing with these kind of issues and also as perhaps a theme or plugin developer so that you can avoid other people running into this issue with your code. So the issue that I actually ran into this morning was using the Swagger theme by Jason Bobich, which I've said over and over again is a phenomenal theme. I'm not criticizing Jason in any way for anything he's done in his theme, but I did find something that I really didn't like this morning, simply because it actually removed some core functionality from WordPress and removed some core behavior. So what I was doing is, you can see I have a post right here. This is just a demo site, and it has a post thumbnail. And if you go in here, you see the full-size image of this nice image of Edinburgh, Scotland. And what I wanted to do is I actually wanted to modify the HTML of this image. And that's actually pretty easy to do if you are using core WordPress functions. And what I mean by that is if we actually go and look at the core code, which we can see right here inside of post thumbnail template.php, which is in the WP includes folder, we can see that the function get the post thumbnail has a filter on it called post thumbnail HTML. So by simply passing a function and putting it through this filter, I can actually modify the HTML that is generated by the get the post thumbnail, which the get the post thumbnail is actually used inside of the post thumbnail function. So let's just say, for example, that I wanted to add a simple div wrapper around this image. Well, if you were doing everything in the way that core does, you could do a simple function like this. Pippin alter thumbnail HTML. You pass the parameters of the filter to it, which is the HTML that's outputted, the post ID, the post thumbnail ID, the size of the thumbnail, and then any other attributes for the thumbnail. So then what you can do is return a div wrapped around the HTML. And what that will do is it will actually result in the thumbnail image, the default HTML generated by the post thumbnail function, and it will wrap it in that div. Well, okay, so I thought, okay, that's really nice and simple. That does exactly what I want to do. Well, now let's take a look at the source. Oh, what in the world? It's actually not outputting my div at all. So I spent a little while exploring and trying to figure out why my div wasn't there. If it had worked correctly, this div right here, which you can see is wrapped around the image, would have a second div inside of it called Pippin thumbnail wrap. But it didn't. So that filter isn't ever getting applied. So I thought, okay, so that means either Jason has gone in and removed the filter or is using a completely custom method. So I kind of tracked it down. Opening up content-single.php in his theme, he has a function called theme boulevard the post thumbnail. Okay, well, that's well and good. There's nothing wrong with doing that. He's just created a function that's kind of a wrapper that outputs all of the additional HTML, does conditional checks, etc. That's great. So then I went and tracked down that function, and I find it's right here inside of his display.php. Once again, that's great. This is actually going right along with WordPress core standards, where you have the function, and then you have a get function as well, whereas the get is just a wrapper for the get function. So that's great. So far so good. So now I have to go find this function, which is inside of his helpers.php file, and here I find it. Now this is where I get a little bit unhappy and where the source of my trouble is. If you go through this function, it's a pretty complex function because he's got a lot of different conditional checks in here for different thumbnail sizes, layouts, etc. that are available inside of his Swagger framework. This is great. Everything in here is great so far, with one big exception. Because he has set up a completely custom function, he has actually removed the ability to use any of the core filters or actions that are available in this function. So let's go back and look at this function really quick. Get the post thumbnail. Inside of here, we have several filters. Number one, we have a filter called Post Thumbnail Size. So that's a filter that allows us to modify the size of our thumbnail if we want, and we could actually do that conditionally based upon the page we're on, etc. So that's great. We have that filter. We have a hook called Begin Fetch Post Thumbnail HTML that will actually allow us to output additional HTML right there on for the HTML. For the image, and then we have one at the end of the HTML, another do action. And at the end, all of that is passed through a filter. So we actually have 4 different ways that we can modify the post thumbnail HTML inside of the core WordPress function. So now let's take this function and let's just see if it exists inside of Jason's theme, inside of his function. It doesn't exist at all. So what that means is that he's actually using his own custom way to build the thumbnail, the featured thumbnail image. Well, normally this is fine, except for the fact that suddenly we lose all of these functions, all of these filters and hooks. And where this really comes important is with plugin developers. This morning, when I ran into the problem, I was actually working on part 6 of my user submitted image galleries tutorial. And I wanted to actually modify the post HTML. Well, because I was using Swagger for my demo, that didn't work. I had to come up with my own custom solution to do it. Which is fine, except for the fact that if you're building a theme, you should always make it so that the core filters and actions are still available. If you go through this, you'll see that Jason actually did a really great job at adding filters and hooks inside of his own function. So for example, he's got one that allows you to filter the overlay for the image. He's got one that actually allows you to modify the final HTML of the image, which is almost exactly the same thing to what Core has done. The problem is just that the core filters and actions do not work. So, to kind of give you an idea of what I would have done in this scenario, here he goes through and he actually gets the image source using the core functions, which is fine. And at the end, the only thing he's done is he's actually used his own function to build the HTML. So here's what I would have done. Where he is retrieving the image, I would have simply done get the thumbnail, like this. So now the image equals the thumbnail. You can then modify all of the additional HTML and wrap it around the image. And then so all of his own custom filters and functions work perfectly fine, but these filters and these actions still work perfectly fine as well. So ultimately what I'm trying to say here is always, regardless of whether you write custom functions or you write custom wrapper functions, always make sure that the core functions inside of WordPress are still accessible and still apply to your theme or your plugin. This is themes and plugins both. So this is great that he's got these extra filters and actions in here, but we need to make sure that the core ones inside of the post thumbnail function already exist. And second, there's no reason to rewrite it if the function already exists in core. By using the core function, we actually maintain the ability to leverage new functionality that gets added to these functions, core fixes, bug fixes, etc. So all we'd have to do to fix this problem is replace this single line in his code with get the post thumbnail. And that fixes the entire issue. So if you are writing these wrapper functions, keep this in mind. Or if you're writing completely custom functions, don't go, if core has a function that does it for you already, utilize it. Wrap code around that function, but ultimately use the core function, because we want to make sure that we don't forget about the functionality that is provided by these core functions. In this case, it may seem really simple. Oh, it's no big deal. I'll just write my own to get the post thumbnail. But we forget that there are extra filters and actions inside of this function called get the post thumbnail. And this is true all over WordPress. Tons and tons of functions inside of WordPress have these kind of filters and the action hooks that you may not even be aware of, and you think, oh, this is completely harmless, not utilizing it. Well, as I found out this morning, that's not the case. So keep core in mind. Do not forget about core functions. Thanks.